The lights of the premiere were the brightest in the world, but they were about to go out forever. This is the story of how one single film could destroy a superstar who seemed to have it all. We were about to uncover a world of Gilded Age fortunes, royal secrets, and one catastrophic misstep that erased a legacy overnight. By the end, you will understand the hidden forces that can topple the mighty. We will reveal the scandal that shattered a reputation and answer who truly orchestrated the downfall. What does it truly take for a person to fall from such a great height? A superstar in the Gilded Age was not merely famous. They were a force of nature. Their wealth was not just substantial, it was dynastic, built on railroads, steel, and oil, granting them a social power that rivaled kings. They moved in a world of private railway cars, European tours, and Fifth Avenue mansions, their every decision chronicled by a press that treated them like royalty. This was the old world order, a society of inherited titles and vast, unassailable fortunes. Then came the flickering light of a new invention, the motion picture, and with it, an entirely new kind of American royalty. Hollywood created stars from nothing, from vaudeville stages and small towns, offering a fame that was global and instantaneous. Here, the currency was not just money, but adoration from millions. This collision was inevitable. The old guard, with its rigid rules and obsession with bloodlines, viewed these new celebrities as fascinating, yet dangerously unpolished curiosities. The film industry, brash and modern, saw the aristocracy as the ultimate prize, a source of validation and a storyline of irresistible glamour. This volatile mix of old money prestige and new world ambition created a perfect storm, a stage set for the most spectacular rises and the most catastrophic falls. Into this glittering, high-stakes world stepped a new kind of player, the Gilded Age heiress. She brought with her a power the studios had never before encountered, her own immense fortune. While other actors were bound by ironclad contracts that dictated their every move, she answered to no one. She could refuse a role she disliked, challenge a director's vision, or even fund her own projects. This financial independence was a direct threat to the very foundation of the Hollywood machine. The studio system was built on control, a carefully managed assembly line where stars were assets to be molded and managed. An heiress was an unmanageable asset, a cog in the machine that had its own motor. Imagine the frustration for a powerful studio head, used to absolute authority, suddenly facing a young woman who did not need his paycheck to survive. Her wealth was her shield, but it also made her a prime target. The studios understood that while they could not control her through money, they could control her through something far more fragile, her reputation. If an heiress became too difficult, too outspoken, or too controversial, the system had ways of fighting back. A targeted takedown was not just about punishing one rebellious star. It was a message to every other actor who might dare to challenge the established order. The very thing that made her powerful, her independence, was the very thing that made her vulnerable. She existed outside their rules, so to bring her down, they would have to break the rules themselves, orchestrating a public downfall so spectacular it would serve as a permanent warning. The film was titled The Eternal Crown, and it was designed to be a masterpiece. Its budget was astronomical, whispered to be over $2 million, a sum so vast it could have built a small city. Every detail was crafted for spectacle, from the custom-woven period costumes to the painstakingly recreated European palaces built on sound stages in California. The studio marketed it not just as a movie, but as a cultural event, the ultimate fusion of Hollywood, glamour, and old-world aristocracy. The entire industry held its breath, waiting for the moment this colossal production would meet the public. For our heiress, this was more than a role, it was her ultimate validation. She had invested not just her name, but her very identity in the project, believing it would cement her status as a serious artist, the true heir to both cinematic and social royalty. The premiere was planned as a coronation, a night where two worlds would finally bow to one another. But on that glittering horizon, a storm was gathering, one that would turn a planned triumph into a legendary disaster. Her name was Eleanor Standish, and she was the sole inheritor of the colossal Standish Railroad fortune. Her life was not one of mere luxury, but of near sovereign power. While Hollywood stars lived in glamorous mansions, Eleanor's New York residence was a 5-story marble palace, its ballroom capable of hosting 500 guests. Her European tours were not vacations. They were royal progresses, where she was feted by dukes and princes who saw her American fortune as a revitalizing force for their ancient bloodlines. She did not merely wear jewelry. She possessed a sapphire necklace once owned by a French empress. When she decided, almost on a whim, to enter motion pictures, it was not an audition, it was an acquisition. The studios did not discover her. She simply arrived, bringing with her a personal fortune that dwarfed the annual budget of most film companies. She was the zenith of Gilded Age ambition, a woman who believed the worlds of finance, society, and art were all hers to command. Her power was absolute because it was built on the one thing no one in Hollywood truly had: complete and total financial freedom. She answered to no studio head, to no press agent, only to her own formidable will. This was the person who stood at the center of the eternal crown, not as an actress playing a queen, but as a queen who had decided, for a moment, to act. For someone like Eleanor Standish, the world of inherited privilege was a gilded cage. Every door was already open, every introduction already made. The thrill of a new challenge, of being judged on merit rather than pedigree, held an intoxicating appeal. Cinema was the one realm where her last name could not guarantee a standing ovation. She craved the raw, unfiltered adoration of the masses, something her carefully managed society life could never provide. This was not a simple dalliance for a bored heiress. It was a profound search for legitimacy in a modern age. To be applauded for a performance, for something she had actually done, offered a form of validation that her trust fund could never purchase. The cultural timing was perfect. The 1920s were a period of dramatic social shift, where the old Victorian orders were crumbling and new, more democratic forms of fame were rising. For the aristocracy, many of whom saw their fortunes dwindling, a foray into film was a way to monetize their own glamour, to turn their family name into a brand. For a supremely wealthy heiress like Eleanor, it was the opposite. It was about escaping the brand, about proving she was more than just a balance sheet in an evening gown. She saw the movie set as a great equalizer, a place where her talent, or lack thereof, would be the final judge. This quest for genuine artistic acclaim, however, placed her on a dangerous collision course with an industry that had very different plans for her. The studios did not want to erase her aristocracy. They wanted to sell it. They were not interested in Elinor the actress, but in Elinor the Standish heiress, a living emblem of a world most people could only dream of. This fundamental misunderstanding of motives, her desire for artistic respect versus their desire to market her privilege, created a fatal crack in the foundation of her entire Hollywood enterprise. How could she possibly succeed when the very thing she was trying to transcend was the only thing the world wanted from her? The news broke not as a simple casting notice, but as a declaration of war on the established order. Elinor Standish, the railroad heiress, would star in The Eternal Crown. The public went into a frenzy. Her photograph splashed across every newspaper from New York to Los Angeles. For the masses, it was a fantasy come to life, a real-life princess stepping directly from the society pages onto the silver screen. They saw it as the ultimate democratization of glamour, a chance to witness true aristocracy up close. But behind the closed doors of Hollywood's power brokers, the reaction was one of pure, undiluted shock. Industry insiders, the directors and producers who had built the town, saw it as the most foolhardy gamble in cinematic history. They whispered in private clubs that the studio had lost its mind, that you could not simply buy talent, no matter how deep your pockets were. This was not just a movie role, it was a fundamental challenge to their entire system of creating stars. They had spent decades cultivating actors from the ground up, teaching them how to move, how to speak, how to cry on cue. Elinor Standish had skipped every single step of that process. Her casting was a revolution, a direct message that the old rules no longer applied if you had the fortune to ignore them. The media, sensing the conflict, played both sides perfectly. Headlines praised her audacity while subtly questioning her ability, framing the entire project as a spectacular experiment that would either redefine fame or end in a very public, very expensive failure. The entire world was now watching, waiting to see if an heiress could truly become a star, or if the gatekeepers of Hollywood would be proven right. The first day of filming felt less like a creative endeavor and more like a hostile corporate takeover. Elinor Standish arrived on set not as a collaborative artist, but as the primary stakeholder. The director, a seasoned veteran named Arthur Lowell, envisioned a subtle, emotionally restrained performance, a quiet tragedy of a queen losing her power. Elinor, drawing from her own life of immense authority, believed the role demanded unshakable regal command, a performance of strength, not vulnerability. Their first major clash was over a single line reading. Arthur asked for a whisper filled with sorrow. Elinor delivered it as a command, her voice ringing with the same cool authority she used to dismiss a poor investment. The soundstage fell into an uncomfortable silence. He was trying to direct an actress, but she was accustomed to giving orders, not taking them. This fundamental disconnect festered, creating a deep chill between the film's two most important creative forces. The tension was not confined to the director's chair. Elinor, used to a life of impeccable service, found the pace and disorganization of a film set intolerable. When the catering failed to meet her standards, she did not complain to the production manager. Instead, She had her personal staff arrange for a 5-star menu to be delivered daily for the entire cast and crew. An act of generosity that felt, to the unionized workers, like a profound insult, a reminder that she was not one of them. She was a visitor from a different planet, trying to fix their world with her money. The cast, a group of respected character actors, grew quietly resentful. They saw her personal luxuries, the private dressing room tent imported from Europe, the chauffeur-driven car standing by at all hours, not as perks of stardom, but as a display of privilege that undermined the collective, gritty work of making a film. Whispers began to snake through the studio lot, stories of her diva-like demands and her inability to accept direction. The set, which should have been a hive of unified purpose, fractured into two camps, those paid by the studio and the one person who was, effectively, paying herself. Every day of production added another crack to the foundation of the eternal crown. A slow, quiet unraveling that the carefully managed press releases could not conceal from those watching from the inside. The first crack arrived not from a film critic, but from a society gossip columnist, a rival heiress jealous of Eleanor's cinematic spotlight, provided a devastating tip to the press. She revealed that Eleanor, in a moment of frustration on set, had been recorded privately mocking the very audience she hoped to enchant. On a hidden dictaphone, her voice was captured, crisp and cold, dismissing moviegoers as naive and easily manipulated, their adoration something she could purchase as easily as a new hat. The columnist ran the quotes verbatim. The headline was a masterstroke of public destruction. Heiress scorns her public. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The fantasy was shattered. The public, who had seen themselves as invited guests to a royal wedding of old and new money, now realized they were merely spectators at a transaction. The adoration curdled into a sense of betrayal. How could they root for a queen who secretly despised her subjects? This was not a scandal about money or love. It was a scandal about respect, and she had failed to pay it. The studio executives, reading the furious letters and plunging advance ticket sales, went into a state of panic. Their entire marketing strategy, built on selling Eleanor as the people's aristocrat, was now in ruins. The whispers from the set, once confined to the industry, now had a public confirmation. The narrative was no longer about a talented heiress, but about an arrogant one. This single leak did more damage than a dozen bad reviews ever could, for it attacked the very heart of her appeal, proving that the gilded cage she so desperately wanted to escape was a prison of her own making. The foundation of the eternal crown was now not just cracked, but actively crumbling, and the tremors were only just beginning. Across the Atlantic, the telegrams began to arrive at Eleanor's hotel, their formal language barely concealing a mounting fury. The Standish family, having spent generations and a fortune weaving their name into the fabric of European aristocracy, viewed her Hollywood escapade not as a lark, but as a profound betrayal. Her uncle, the family patriarch, wrote that she was debasing their name, turning their legacy into a cheap spectacle for the masses. The threat was not subtle, a reminder that her vast inheritance was not yet fully hers, and that continued association with the film could see her cut off from the fortune that gave her all her power. But the pressure did not stop with her own relatives. From the gilded drawing rooms of London in the sun-drenched villas of the Riviera. A chorus of disapproval rose from the very royals and nobles she had once called friends. A distant cousin by marriage to a minor European prince formally requested his family's name be disassociated from the project, fearing the film would cast their lineage in a vulgar light. For this old guard, Elinar's performance was not acting. It was a form of cultural theft. She was profiting from the imitation of a life they considered sacred and exclusive, reducing centuries of tradition and privilege to a 2-hour entertainment for shop girls and clerks. The scandal was no longer just about a leaked quote. It was about a breach of contract with her own class. This external drama seeped onto the soundstage like a poison gas. Every piece of bad news, every threatening letter, made Elinar more isolated and more rigid in her performance. Where the director pleaded for a moment of human frailty, she offered only a stony, impenetrable facade, as if building a wall around herself on camera. The pressure to prove her worth as an actress was now compounded by a desperate need to justify her rebellion to the world she had left behind. She was not just fighting for a good review. She was fighting for her very identity, and the strain was beginning to show in every frame of film. The grand experiment was collapsing under the weight of two worlds, both of which now seemed to want her to fail. The press, which had once built her pedestal, now took up hammers. The initial wave of fawning coverage, filled with romanticized tales of her transition from ballroom to soundstage, evaporated overnight. In its place came a torrent of sensationalist headlines that transformed her from a daring pioneer into a symbol of arrogant privilege. The New York Daily Mirror ran a cartoon depicting Elinar as a giant, gilded statue, her foot accidentally crushing a crowd of tiny, adoring fans, the caption reading, "Oops, did I step on someone?" It was a brutal, simple image that perfectly crystallized the public's new perception. Editorial pages, once hopeful, now asked scathing questions. Was Hollywood merely a rich woman's playground? Did she believe her fortune could purchase talent the way it purchased jewels? Each article picked apart her earlier statements, twisting her confidence into conceit. A quote about finding the film set chaotic was reprinted as standish heiress disgusted by common work. Her desire for artistic legitimacy was reframed as a contempt for the very industry she had joined. This was not just criticism, it was a coordinated character assassination. The media understood that her real product was not her performance, but her persona, and they had decided that persona was now toxic. Why did the press turn so viciously? The answer lies in the economics of attention. A perfect, adored heiress was a good story for a week. A flawed, collapsing heiress, revealed as a hypocrite, was a story that could sell papers for months. Her downfall was more profitable than her ascent. Every leaked whisper from the set, every stern telegram from her family, provided fresh fuel for this new narrative. The press did not just report on her sinking ship. They actively fired the cannons that were holding it below the waterline, realizing that a spectacular disaster captivated the public far more than a smooth, successful voyage ever could. The woman who had sought the raw judgment of the masses was now receiving it in its most unforgiving form, and the echo was deafening. The night of the premiere was a spectacle of almost blinding opulence. Searchlights carved through the Hollywood sky, illuminating a river of limousines depositing the city's elite onto a crimson carpet. Inside the theater, the air was thick with the scent of gardenias and expensive perfume. Elinor Standish arrived in a gown of woven silver thread, a living statue of Gilded Age grandeur, smiling as flashbulbs popped like 1,000 tiny stars. The audience watched in rapt silence, the weight of $2 million in immense expectation pressing down on every frame. But as the film unfolded, a different kind of silence began to descend, a quiet, uncomfortable void where applause should have been. The grand coronation was over before the final credits finished rolling. The next morning, the critics delivered their verdicts with the force of a public execution. The Los Angeles Times declared the film a beautiful, empty shell, a mausoleum of its own budget. But the most brutal attacks were reserved for Elinor. The New York Herald Tribune's review became infamous, stating, "Miss Standish does not portray a queen. She presents a museum exhibit. One observes the jewels and the gown, but searches in vain for a flicker of human emotion behind the glassy, imperious stare. Her performance is not a failure of acting, but a rejection of it." Another critic wrote that she moved through the film as if waiting for a servant to bring her the next line. They singled out the very same qualities her director had pleaded with her to change: her unyielding regality and her inability to project vulnerability. The performance that she believed was her ultimate validation was being dismantled in print as a catastrophic miscalculation, the central failure that sank the entire colossal enterprise. The public, already stung by her leaked comments, now had permission from the experts to reject her completely. The fantasy was not just broken, it was declared dead on arrival. The final numbers were a disaster of almost mathematical perfection. The Eternal Crown, with a production and marketing budget soaring past $2 million, managed to scrape together a mere $300,000 at the domestic box office. It was a financial hemorrhage, a loss so profound it sent shockwaves through the entire industry. For every single dollar the studio had invested, it was getting back less than 15 cents. The film disappeared from theaters within a matter of weeks, the posters torn down and replaced with a grim silence. In the aftermath, the studio's internal reports placed the blame squarely on one person, Elinor Standish. The conclusion was stark and unforgiving. Her toxic public persona, fueled by the leaked comments and amplified by the press, had rendered the film utterly unmarketable. Audiences had not merely rejected a bad movie, they had actively rejected her. The studio heads, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, calculated that the scandals surrounding the star had effectively devalued their $2 million asset to zero. Her name, once considered the project's greatest asset, was now its fatal liability. The financial ruin was not just a loss on a balance sheet. It was a monument to a single, catastrophic miscalculation, proving that no fortune, no matter how vast, could protect a star from the collective judgment of the public they had failed to respect. The invitations simply stopped arriving. The grand ballrooms of Fifth Avenue, once her natural habitat, fell silent. Elinor Standish, who had commanded the attention of dukes and industrialists, now found her name conspicuously absent from the guest lists of the Astors and the Vanderbilts. It was a quiet, brutal excision. The society pages, which had once chronicled her every appearance, now gossiped about her absence, a form of public shaming more effective than any printed accusation. Her telephone, which had once rung incessantly with requests and invitations, now sat in an echoing quiet. The very friends who had encouraged her Hollywood adventure, sipping champagne and calling her daring, were the first to drop her. They saw her failure not as a personal tragedy, but as a contagious social disease. To be associated with her was to be associated with vulgarity, with a desperate grab for a fame that their world was supposed to be above. Her fall from cinematic grace was one thing, but her exile from the world of old money was a sentence of social death. The Gilded Cage had not just closed its door, it had locked her out. How does a person who has never known a closed door suddenly find every single one of them barred? The silence of her marble mansion was now deafening, a constant reminder that the respect she had taken for granted was a currency that could be revoked in an instant. Hollywood's revenge was swift, silent, and absolute. The studio that had bled millions on the Eternal Crown did not issue a public statement denouncing Alina Standish. Instead, they picked up the telephone. A series of quiet, decisive calls were made to the heads of every other major studio in town. The message was not a request, but a directive, a matter of collective survival. They had allowed a rogue element into their system, an actor they could not control, and the result had nearly bankrupted one of their own. She was to be made an example. The blacklist against Alina was not a written document, but an unshakable understanding. No offers for new roles would be forthcoming. Her agent, who had once fielded a dozen calls a day, now found his inquiries met with a sudden, uniform silence. A proposed contract for a comedy at Paramount vanished. A discussion for a dramatic part at Warner Brothers evaporated. It was as if her name had been erased from the industry's memory overnight. This was not a matter of her talent or lack thereof. It was a cold, calculated business decision. She was now branded as box office poison, and in the risk-averse world of studio filmmaking, that was a contagion no one was willing to catch. The gatekeepers had not just closed the gates, they had welded them shut. How do you fight an enemy that refuses to acknowledge you even exist? For Alina, the silence from the studios was more terrifying than any critical review. It was the sound of her new career being smothered in its crib. But the financial retaliation did not stop with a frozen future. The studio lawyers descended, their briefcases filled with the very contracts that had once symbolized her power. They argued that her conduct, specifically the leaked scandal that rendered the film unmarketable, constituted a breach of her contractual obligations. They were not merely refusing to pay her agreed-upon salary. They were countersuing for damages, claiming her toxic publicity had actively devalued their property. Alina, armed with her own battalion of high-priced attorneys, fought back. The legal battles that followed were a war of attrition, fought in dusty courtrooms far from the glitter of the premiere. It was a brutal clash of two different kinds of power: the studio's institutional control against her personal fortune. For months, the case dragged on, a draining spectacle of depositions and legal maneuvers that played out in the business sections of newspapers. In the end, a settlement was reached, its terms sealed and confidential, but the outcome was clear. She may have retained some of her money, but she had lost the war. The message was sent to every actor in Hollywood. a stark warning that the system would protect itself, and no one, not even an heiress, was too big to fail. Her name was now permanently etched on a list of the untouchable, a ghost in the very machine she had tried to command. The silence of her exile was broken by the sound of her own checkbook opening. Alina Standish was not a woman accustomed to surrender. If Hollywood would not give her a role, she would simply create her own. She funded an independent film, a small, artistic piece titled The Glass House, far removed from the grand spectacles of her past. She hired a young, avant-garde director, believing a serious, modern project would cleanse the stain of the Eternal Crown from her reputation. But the moment the cameras started rolling, the old patterns reasserted themselves. She was not just the star, she was the sole financier, and her creative suggestions carried the weight of a bank vault. The young director, initially grateful for the opportunity, soon found his vision being systematically dismantled and rebuilt to suit her own. The set became a tense echo of her previous failure, a place where artistic collaboration was strangled by financial control. When The Glass House was finally completed, it was denied a wide release. The few critics who saw it at a small, private screening panned it as a vanity project, a confused and self-indulgent effort that proved she had learned nothing from her past mistakes. Her attempt to buy her way back to artistic credibility had only cemented her reputation as a talentless dilettante. Rejection from the silver screen turned her gaze toward the stage. The theater, she reasoned, was a place of pure craft, untainted by studio politics. She used her remaining social connections to secure a leading role in a Broadway revival of a classic play. The rehearsals were a disaster. Accustomed to the multiple takes of film, she could not master the sustained emotional arc required for a live performance. Her voice, perfect for the intimate close-up, failed to project to the back of the balcony. On opening night, the audience's restlessness was a physical force. A critic for a major newspaper delivered the final blow, writing that her performance was like watching a statue slowly realize it was in the wrong museum. The play closed after only 17 performances, a financial loss borne entirely by its backers, who now joined the long list of those who saw her name as a curse. Her final, most desperate move was a carefully orchestrated publicity tour of Europe, a bid to reconnect with the public that had once adored her. But the strategy was fatally flawed. Instead of humility, the tour reeked of the very privilege that had caused her downfall. She was photographed visiting orphanages and hospitals, but the images felt staged and distant, a queen performing a duty rather than a woman showing genuine connection. At one stop, she was meant to sign autographs for a crowd of fans. When only a handful of people showed up, a photographer captured the devastating image of Alina sitting alone at a long, empty table, a single pen in her hand, staring into a distance filled with nothing but her own ruin. The photo was published worldwide, becoming the ultimate symbol of her irreversible fall. Every attempt to rise had only dug the hole deeper, proving that in the court of public opinion, some sentences are truly for life. The ultimate humiliation arrived not in a legal document, but in the roar of laughter from a vaudeville stage. A new act began touring the country, featuring a popular comedian in a ridiculous silver gown, parading across the stage with a frozen, haughty expression. He would stare at a potted plant, as if it were a disobedient servant, and deliver dramatic lines in a comically monotone voice, proclaiming, "I am not acting, I am condescending." The audiences howled with recognition and delight. This was no longer private criticism, it was public ritual, a collective exorcism of a fallen idol. Magazines like Puck, the sharp-tongued chronicler of the era, published vicious full-page cartoons. One depicted a giant, empty jewel box labeled the Standish Fortune, with a tiny, weeping figure of Alina sitting inside, the caption reading, "All dressed up and nowhere to go." Her name detached itself from her person and became a shorthand for a very specific kind of failure. To call a social climber a regular Alina Standish was to imply their ambitions vastly outstripped their talent. To describe a business venture as a real eternal crown was to predict its certain and spectacular financial ruin. She had become a cultural cautionary tale, a punchline that everyone understood. How does a person live when their identity has been reduced to a synonym for hubris? The very fame she had craved had curdled into a permanent, inescapable mockery, a funhouse mirror distortion of her life that was now more real to the public than she ever was. The Gilded Heiress had been transformed into a national joke, and the laughter felt like it would never end. The laughter was a storm she could no longer weather. Alina Standish simply vanished. One day, her name was a punchline in every newspaper, and the next, it was as if she had been erased from the world. There was no grand farewell, no statement to the press. The marble mansion on Fifth Avenue was shuttered, its windows like blind eyes staring out at a city that had moved on. Her destination was a secluded estate on the shores of Lake Geneva, a property so remote it was known only to the local villagers and the family lawyers who managed its upkeep. This was not the glittering French Riviera of her youth, a place for seeing and being seen. This was a fortress of solitude, a place where the only audience was the silent, snow-capped Alps reflected in the deep blue water. Her life there was a study in stark contrast. The woman who had once commanded ballrooms now commanded the silence of a vast, empty library. The private railway cars and fleets of servants were replaced by a single, elderly housekeeper who brought her meals on a tray and spoke only when spoken to. Her days were no longer dictated by film schedules or social obligations, but by the slow, unchanging rhythm of the lake itself. She would take a single, solitary walk along the gravel path at the same hour each day, a lone figure in a simple, dark coat, a world away from the silver-threaded gowns of her premier. The glamour was gone, replaced by a monastic existence. She spent her afternoons reading, not society pages or scripts, but heavy historical volumes, as if trying to lose herself in the grand, impersonal sweep of time. The phone never rang, the doorbell never chimed. The only mail that arrived were bank statements and the occasional legal document, reminders of the fortune that remained, even as the life it was meant to fund had evaporated. Why would someone who thrived on attention choose such absolute isolation? The answer lies in the nature of the wound. Public humiliation is a poison that seeps into the soul. Every glance in a crowded room, every whisper behind a hand, would have been a fresh reminder of her failure. For Alina, the world itself had become a stage where she was forced to play the role of a fool. Exile was the only way to end the performance. In Switzerland, There was no one to perform for. The villagers, if they knew who she was, showed a respectful disinterest. She was not a star or a scandal there. She was simply the reclusive American woman in the large house on the hill. This anonymity was her only remaining comfort. She was not hiding from her past so much as she was waiting for it to dissolve into the thin, clear mountain air. A ghost finally laid to rest. The gilded cage had been traded for a glass bell jar, a perfect, silent prison of her own making, where the only thing she had left to control was the profound and utter quiet. The echo of that laughter never truly faded. For Elinor Standish, the legacy of the Eternal Crown was not merely a failed film. It was a black hole that consumed her entire identity. Every prior accomplishment, every facet of her remarkable life, was pulled into its gravitational field and vanished. The years of philanthropic work, where she had funded entire wings of hospitals and libraries, were forgotten. Her sharp business acumen, the very intelligence that had managed and grown portions of her fortune, was dismissed as a rich woman's hobby. The public, and even history itself, refused to see her as a complex human being. She became a one-dimensional caricature, a single, cautionary chapter in the story of fame. The narrative was too perfect, too morally satisfying to complicate with facts. A proud heiress, brought low by her own hubris, was a tale as old as time, and the world decided it was the only story about her worth telling. Her life was no longer a biography, it was an allegory. How many other figures have suffered the same fate, their entire existence reduced to a single, catastrophic misstep? We see it even today, where a celebrity's lifetime of work can be erased by one viral scandal, one poorly judged comment. The court of public opinion delivers a verdict that is both swift and permanent, and its sentence is often a form of historical amnesia. For Elinor, the woman who had sought to be remembered for her art was now only remembered for her failure, a permanent resident in the cultural memory as the star who fell, and the film that pushed her. Elinor Standish's story feels uniquely brutal, yet she was not entirely alone. The same social and economic forces that lifted Gilded Age heiresses to dizzying heights also made their falls a terrifying possibility. Consider the early struggles of Peggy Guggenheim. While she would later become a legendary art collector, her initial foray into the public sphere was marked by scandal and ridicule. She opened a small avant-garde gallery in London, a move her wealthy family viewed as an embarrassment, a trivial dalliance unworthy of the Guggenheim name. The press of the time did not treat her as a serious businesswoman, but as a bored socialite playing at a profession, a narrative that severely limited her early credibility and isolated her from the very establishment whose respect she needed. Her path to redemption was long and hard-fought, a luxury Elinor Standish was never afforded. Then there was Edwina Mountbatten, whose life was a masterclass in navigating public perception. Married into the British royal family, her independent spirit and rumored romantic entanglements, particularly with a foreign politician, constantly threatened to tip into full-blown scandal. She lived under the microscope, where a single misstep could have shattered her privileged position. The key difference was control. Edwina managed to channel her nonconformity into extensive philanthropic work, reframing her independence as a form of noble duty. She learned the art of bending the rules without appearing to break them, a subtle skill Eleanor never acquired. These parallel lives reveal a cruel pattern. For a Gilded Age heiress, stepping outside the rigid script of high society was an immense risk. The world was eager to watch them try, and even more eager to watch them fail. Their wealth provided a platform, but it also made them a target, magnifying every stumble into a public spectacle. The tragedy of Eleanor Standish was not that she fell, but that the net that might have caught others' family support, a forgiving social circle, a second chance from the industry, was pulled away the moment she became more liability than asset. Her story is the most extreme version of a cautionary tale that haunted an entire generation of privileged women. Arthur Lowell walked away from the wreckage of the Eternal Crown, a broken man. For the celebrated director, the film was not just a professional failure. It was a profound artistic betrayal. He had envisioned a subtle human tragedy, but the final product was a monument to everything he despised in cinema. Empty spectacle anchored by a performance he could not control. The critics, in their savaging of Eleanor, had been only slightly kinder to him, questioning how a director of his caliber could have lost command of his own set. The industry whispers were even more brutal, suggesting he had been outmaneuvered and emasculated by a wealthy amateur. His phone, once a direct line to every studio head in town, fell silent. The offers did not just dry up. They vanished into a desert of professional exile. A man who had once been offered the reins to multi-million-dollar epics now found his agent struggling to get him meetings for low-budget B-pictures. The stain of the financial disaster was a mark he could not wash off, and in a town ruled by balance sheets, he was now considered a dangerous risk. His name became permanently linked to the catastrophe, a cautionary tale of what happens when art collides with an unstoppable financial force. How does a storyteller recover when his greatest failure becomes the only story anyone remembers? Lowell's path to redemption was not a triumphant return, but a slow, painful crawl back from the brink. He was eventually forced to leave Hollywood altogether, relocating to Europe to direct small, poorly funded features under a pseudonym. The man who had once commanded armies of technicians was now begging for funding. His once sharp confidence eroded into a kind of permanent, weary resignation. He never directed another major American film. Arthur Lowell became the ultimate collateral damage, a talented artist crushed between the millstones of a star's hubris and an industry's ruthless demand for a scapegoat. His forgotten career stands as a silent testament to the other lives ruined by that single, cursed film, proving that when a star falls, it rarely falls alone. But what if that telegram from the studio had never been answered? Imagine a world where Eleanor Standish, perhaps heeding the frantic warnings of her uncle, politely declined the role in the Eternal Crown. Her life would have charted a course along the well-worn tracks of Gilded Age expectation, a path of immense influence, albeit within a much smaller, more controlled sphere. Without the catastrophic public failure, her social standing would have remained unshaken. She would have continued to preside over the marble mansion on Fifth Avenue, her name forever gracing the guest lists for the most exclusive balls and charity galas. Her philanthropy, no longer overshadowed by scandal, would have defined her legacy. We might remember her today as the formidable patron who funded entire public libraries or endowed a world-class medical research institute. her wealth channeled into monuments of civic good rather than a monument to cinematic failure. Her foray into business, once dismissed as a hobby, could have flourished in this alternate timeline. Freed from the label of box office poison, she might have leveraged her sharp intellect and vast capital to become a silent partner in groundbreaking ventures, perhaps in the nascent aviation industry or early broadcasting, her influence shifting from society pages to the financial section. She could have married a European prince, not as a desperate escape, but as a strategic merger of power and prestige, her American fortune revitalizing an ancient dynasty. The restless energy she poured into a doomed acting career would have found a different, more sustainable outlet. She might have become a formidable political hostess, shaping policy from her dinner table, or a celebrated travel writer, chronicling her journeys for an admiring public. The core of her desire, the search for a meaningful identity beyond her inheritance, might have been fulfilled in 100 quieter, more lasting ways. This parallel life underscores the brutal randomness of her fate. A single decision, one signature on a contract, diverted the entire river of her existence from a channel of respected, enduring influence into a dead end of public ridicule and isolation. Her story is a stark reminder that for those in the spotlight, the line between icon and cautionary tale is often no wider than the edge of a movie script. The catastrophe was never just about a wooden performance or a leaked comment. Those were merely the sparks that lit the fuse. The true powder keg was a society terrified of a woman who refused to play her part. Elinor Standish committed the ultimate transgression, not of art, but of social order. She was a woman of immense wealth, born into a class that demanded discretion and the quiet exercise of power from behind gilded doors. Her role was to be a patron, a hostess, a dynastic asset, stepping onto a public stage, seeking the adoration of the masses, was a direct violation of this unspoken contract. Her class expected her to uphold its dignity, not to trade it for the vulgar currency of popular acclaim. When she failed, their punishment was not merely disappointment, it was a swift and total excommunication. They made an example of her, a warning to every other heiress who might dream of leaving the cage, no matter how gilded its bars. This was not just about a bad movie. It was about a wealthy woman being put back in her place. The backlash was also deeply rooted in the era's rigid gender norms. A man of her standing might have been called eccentric for such a venture, his failure chalked up to a bold gamble. For a woman, it was seen as proof of inherent frivolity, a hysterical flight from her duties. Her assertiveness on set, the very quality that managed her fortune, was reframed as difficult and unladylike. She was caught in an impossible double bind. To succeed, she needed to be a commanding presence, but the moment she commanded, she was condemned for being unwomanly. The press, dominated by male editors and critics, gleefully dismantled her for this sin. They punished her for having the audacity to believe her money and her will could buy her a new identity. And what of the public's role in this destruction? The fragility of fame was the final crushing force. The audience that had lifted her up was not a monolith of loyal fans. It was a fickle jury that could deliver a death sentence overnight. Their love was conditional upon her maintaining a perfect illusion. The moment she revealed her contempt for them, the illusion shattered, and their affection instantly transformed into a righteous fury. They felt betrayed, and in their collective power, they enacted a brutal justice. They did not just stop watching her film, they actively participated in her humiliation, buying the papers that mocked her and laughing at the vaudeville skits. Her fame was a loan, not a gift, and the moment she broke the terms, the entire public called in the debt at once. So we must ask, was Elinor Standish destroyed by a bad performance, or was she sacrificed on the altar of class anxiety and gender panic? Her story suggests that the highest towers are not brought down by a single mistake, but by the collective weight of the expectations they failed to uphold. Her final years were a study in absolute silence. Elinor Standish lived out the remainder of her life in that Swiss villa, a prisoner of her own making, her only companions the towering mountains and the quiet lapping of the lake against the shore. The fiery defiance that had once defined her seemed to have been extinguished completely, replaced by a profound and unshakable resignation. Visitors, though they were exceedingly rare, reported a woman who was not bitter, but hollowed out, as if the person she had been had simply departed, leaving behind a well-mannered ghost. She never spoke of the Eternal Crown, never mentioned Hollywood, and if a newspaper happened to find its way to her with some mention of the old scandal, she would turn the page without a flicker of recognition. It was not a peace born of acceptance, but a deeper, more chilling state of emotional surrender. She had accepted her sentence. The world had written its final chapter on her life, and she had simply stopped trying to edit it. Her death, when it came, was as quiet as her exile. There was no grand funeral, no procession of former friends or co-stars paying their respects. The news was buried in the back pages of a few international papers, a brief, factual obituary that listed her birth, her inheritance, and her infamous film, reducing a complex human life to 3 bullet points of tragedy. The immense fortune, with no direct heirs, was dispersed into a labyrinth of trusts and charitable foundations, its final destination as obscure as the woman who had once commanded it. So, what is the ultimate lesson of Elinor Standish's life? It is not merely that pride comes before a fall. Her story is the definitive cautionary tale for anyone born into privilege or skyrocketed to fame. A stark reminder that the higher you climb on a platform built on public perception, the more catastrophic the eventual plunge. Wealth can buy you independence, but it cannot buy you talent, and it most certainly cannot buy you the loyalty of a fickle world. Fame is a capricious god, and it demands a constant sacrifice of authenticity, privacy, and sometimes sanity. Elinor sought to control her own narrative, to trade one kind of power for another, and in doing so, she lost everything. Her life stands as a permanent warning, a ghost at the feast of every gala, a whisper in the ear of every star who believes they are untouchable. The Gilded Cage is not made of money, but of expectation, and the lock clicks shut the moment you stop, giving the people exactly what they want. Her tragic arc is a masterclass in the mechanics of a downfall. Elinor Standish possessed everything old money could offer, yet she reached for the new, intoxicating power of the silver screen. That single decision to star in the Eternal Crown set in motion an irreversible chain of events. It was the catalyst that fused the volatile elements of aristocratic expectation, Hollywood's ruthless machinery, and the public's fragile adoration into a weapon of mass destruction. Her story is not just one of personal failure, but a profound lesson about the dangerous intersection of old wealth and new media. It reveals how quickly public perception can curdle, transforming a celebrated icon into a despised caricature overnight. The Gilded World demanded she remain a symbol. Hollywood wanted to sell that symbol, and the audience craved a relatable queen. In trying to be all things to all people, she ended up being nothing to anyone. The price of her ambition was not merely a lost fortune or a ruined reputation. It was the complete and total erasure of her own complex identity. She became a cautionary tale written in the ink of scandal, a permanent resident in the gallery of the fallen. So we are left to wonder which star's story of a spectacular collapse captures your imagination. Is there another figure from history or Hollywood whose rise and fall you find equally compelling? Share your thoughts, because every story of a great fall holds a universal truth about the heights from which we can all tumble.